Hey everyone, welcome back here to another interview I got for you. This one is going to be interesting. I think I have Ricardo Barbosa here, and Ricardo has basically created. He's basically broken .NET. He has gotten
Okay.
down into the guts and has created something that is pretty phenomenal called CodeCop. And I thought this is really the most amazing thing that I think I've seen in the .NET ecosystem in quite a while here. So I thought it'd be cool to have him on and talk about that. So welcome, Ricardo.
Hi, John. Thanks for having me. It's a pleasure to be here.
Yeah, no problem. So why don't you just give a little bit of background about yourself before we talk about CodeCop and all the nasty things you're doing in .NET.
But I call it COP, right?
Yeah.
So I've been a developer for quite a long time now, always on the .NET space and on Microsoft technologies. I like to say I'm an entrepreneur at heart because I like to create products and stuff as side projects. And basically, I'm not yet a real entrepreneur because I work during the day for a telecom company. But basically, that's what I like to do. It's to create stuff, invent cool systems that help people, especially developers, do their jobs and do their jobs quickly. And that's why I created something like CodeCop, basically.
Okay. All right. Yeah. We met up when you contacted me because you had the original idea before it was called Code Cop,
Yeah.
and it's kind of funny because I get a lot of like requests for different, oh, look at this thing. And when I saw what you were doing, I was like, I dropped everything. I was like, okay, I have to check out. So that it got my attention.
Yeah.
So why don't you talk a little bit about what you like how Code Cop started off, and then we can get into kind of what it is in a bit here. But I think the story of how it started is pretty interesting.
Yeah. I contacted you quite a long time ago, and it all started with a project that I had way back called Shape Effects, where I was experimenting stuff with dynamic compilation,
Right.
and I was investigating how I could in real time execute code. And all the experimentations I was doing around ShapeFX really got me into building something that today is CodeCop. Basically, CodeCop lets you do method interception in .NET using JSON. Which is quite a odd thing. It's like mixing Frankenstein with a chicken.
Right. Yeah.
It has nothing to do. But yeah, basically that's how it started. Well, I started investigating the intrinsics of .NET and how I could basically create something in real time that could do method interception. But it started with, like I said, with a project called ShapeFX, but that project was more focused on dynamic compilation. But all the investigations that I did around it led me to reach the point where I am today, where I could know quite as much as of the .NET intrinsics and basically, like you said, break it apart.
Yeah. Okay. So just to give some background for people who might not be sure. So the idea, the dynamic compilation is of course like compiling code from within your code while it's running, right? That's
Yeah, yeah. But this project has nothing to do with dynamic compilation. ShapeFX was something, code copy is another. What I was trying to say is that all the knowledge that ShapeFX gave me and all the investigation led me to build CodeCop. CodeCop is a totally different thing. It doesn't work with dynamic compilation. Basically, what it does is method interception. And what is cool about it is because the method interception, contrary to other frameworks, happens live. Okay, while your application is running, you can intercept methods directly, and that's what's cool about it.
Right. So let's talk a little bit about that too. The method interception, again, just for somebody who's not familiar with method interception, because not every developer is using method interception. It's sort of a, more of a higher level concept. So this idea of basically going through and replacing a method with a new method automatically, I think is pretty interesting. And I guess a lot of other programming languages, non-.NET ones, allow that. They call it maybe like, like in Ruby, right? You can redefine a method. But in .NET, you can't really say, hey, on object get class or whatever, or on any of the base methods, like you couldn't just redefine that. But with CodeCop, you can, right?
Yeah. So basically, on dynamic type languages like Ruby or JavaScript, you can basically do whatever you like. But on statically typed languages like C#, for instance, that's why they are steadily compiled. I mean, they want type safety. They don't want you to mess up things at runtime. So the compiler has to be sure that executing something that is safe. So basically, .NET is, although it has a lot of support, also to do, some interception, but very limited one. Basically, what I what I do with CodeCop, I take that limitation that the framework already gives us and try to give to a .NET developer the liberty to do method interception with almost any kind of constraints. So that's basically what I do with CodeCop.
Right. Okay. So I think probably one thing that a lot of .NET developers would be familiar with is using, like a mocking framework, right? And there's a few mocking frameworks out there, but most of the mocking frameworks in .NET, I've been frustrated before when I've tried to, especially when you first start doing like unit testing or test-driven development, you mock public methods, and sure, that's fine, right? You set up that mock, but then you're like, oh, if I could just test this private method, and you can't mock the private method because you don't have access to it. But with CodeCop, you could do that, right? Because you could just redefine anything you want.
Yeah. Basically, if probably we can for the listeners and viewers give a little background. When you want to do method interception in .NET, you have several options. Okay. You have some options that already the framework gives you. Okay, with context-bound objects and Marshall by ref objects and real proxies, and basically, it's kind of a proxy-based approach. Okay, the frameworks allow you to build wrappers around objects and use those wrappers to intercept methods, but you're not using the real object itself. That technique requires objects to be inheriting from other special objects like Marshall by refs, and they must have public interfaces. And it's kind of limiting, like you said, when you want to intercept a private method or a method that has some sort of other visibility. Then you have other options, okay, that are outside of the framework, like the super known Castle Dynamic Proxy, okay, that basically it's the same technique, but what it does, basically it implements interfaces automatically at runtime and builds also these wrappers around objects. So we are not working with real objects. We have the overhead of creating wrappers around the objects. And as I said, they need public interfaces and or virtual methods on the abstract classes to override.
Because it's really just using inheritance, right? In that case, it's just It's an
Yeah,
abstraction level. It's just saying, hey, here's this thing, and it's a proxy. And when you call this method, our implementation actually is going to do something different. But
yeah, yeah. You
which
have to create interfaces, okay, for the proxies to be built.
right,
Or if you want to work with the object themselves, you have to have abstract classes with virtual methods to override. Okay, so that's how it works in the background. When you want to work with real objects, you have other options out there. You have the super known, also the PostSharp library.
mhm,
Okay, PostSharp does a technique that is called IL weaving. Okay, basically what it does, it injects IL onto the library itself as a post-build step, and that technique is much more powerful than the previous ones because it allows you to work with your objects directly. And that technique is called static weaving.
okay.
Um,
And just to be clear, with that technique, if someone were using that, they'd build their application, they'd have their DLL, and
yeah.
then some post sharp directives that you would put into, you'd say, okay, and replace this method with this one that does the logging and then calls the method.
Mhm.
And post sharp knows how to go through, read the IL, put in some new IL that maybe would cause the code to jump to a different point, or to be able to run your logging method before it ran the real method, or do whatever you wanted. But it requires you to compile the code first, have the DLL, then run something afterwards, and then that modifies. It's modifying the actual DLL, right?
Yeah, it's like I said, it's static.
Okay.
It is Bootstrap as a post-build step. You build your app or your assembly in Visual Studio, like Control-Shift-B, and
Right.
then there is a post-build step that the PostSharp plugin will inject its code on on the already compiled assembly. So that's what it does. CodeCop also uses this technology, but live. It does dynamic weaving. It weaves the IL instead of in the assembly. It weaves in memory. So the advantage of this is, contrary to PostSharp or other static weaving libraries, once the IL is weaved on the assembly and the assembly is loaded into your app domain, you cannot change it anymore. With CodeCop, it's live. You can always change the method, okay? If you, for instance, intercept a method and then you inject some code, and then afterwards you can inject another code on the method. You
Right.
can revert what you've done. It's live, okay?
See,
So it's
this
a
is
little
yeah.
bit, yeah. I'm sorry, John.
I was just gonna say, this is the part that blows my mind, right?
Yeah,
Because I mean, when I'm thinking about this, I'm thinking about like PostSharp is useful, right? Doing that method interception, especially like I mean, a common use case is I want to add some logging to my production application, right?
yeah,
So I might, create a new version of PostSharp or of my DLL that I've instrumented with PostSharp, so that I've added these logging, so I can figure out what's going on with this weird scenario in production. But I would have to build it, redeploy it, and now I have a special version in production. But if I were
yeah.
using CodeCop, wouldn't I then be able to, like, I have the production app running out there, I see this problem, I go into the live running app and configure a file, or I have a hook point, and I could totally swap out a method and make it do logging, or I could even just change the functionality if I wanted to do a quick hot fix to something. Is that, can I do all that?
Yeah, it's almost like that. You have to first add the CodeCop library as a dependency,
Right. Okay.
and you have to bootstrap it inside your app.
Sure.
Because I already did that when the first time I built a prototype. It was very unobtrusive. It auto bootstrapped with module initializers and stuff like that. But that would probably be a security concern, because anyone could just go there and out of the blue intercept your app. Okay, so I have decided that if an app wants to be intercepted, it has to express a clear intent of being intercepted. Okay, so you just have to add the assembly, the code cop assembly, and call one simple line, that is cop intercept. Afterwards, you can deploy your app, and then with the JSON file, yes, you can do whatever you were talking. You can change any method on your app on the fly without recompiling. Yeah.
Right. So you have this app running in production. You want to add logging to this method. Bam, you just change the JSON file, and now this method now logs.
Yeah.
Or I want to change, or even the most, but to see, and this is where, okay, mind blown second time, right? It's because I think PostSharp you could do all that, except you'd have to recompile and redeploy the app. So it's awesome to be able to just do that live in production. Yes. But I'm pretty sure with PostSharp and any of the other technologies, I couldn't like modify the entity framework. I couldn't, because it's a signed DLL. I can't, go in there and muck with that and change the way that, one of the base class functionality pieces work, or one of these libraries that I don't own. But with CodeCop, I could do anything I want, right? I mean, I could take, the database functionality to like wherever I want in any library, and I could change the method, have it log, so I could do full tracing through code that isn't even mine, or I could totally alter the behavior. Is that true?
Yeah. With PostSharp, you can. I'm pretty sure you can do that also, but I think they don't support it. But with CodeCop, yeah, you can do that in real time. You can even mess with the base class library. You can even change, for instance, console write line or other method. I mean, I'm not really showing that as a flag. That is very cool, because I mean, I don't want people messing up with the framework itself. But use CodeCop with their code. That's what I want most. But if they want to do that, because as you mentioned, if you want to mock some kind of framework method, you can do it. Or like you said, entity framework, you can literally, for instance, grab the DB context and wipe all the code out of the DB context and do probably a mocking method that really can help you on your tests, instead of having to build everything around it. And yes, you can mock and intercept signed assemblies, because we are doing that in memory, so there's no really, that doesn't affect us. Like PostSharp, for instance, they have to re-sign the assembly, and if they want to. I'm mentioning PostSharp, but I can, but I love the library. Okay, I'm not.
Oh yeah, it's a great tool.
I respect them a lot.
And
I learned a lot with them. So, but I could mention other libraries, like for instance Fody or Mr. Advice. There are libraries that are open source and do the exact same thing that PostSharp does, the exact technique. So they have to re-sign the assembly, and it's always a problem. But with CodeCop, as I said, it works in memory, and you have those kind of problems don't really arise. You are working with the IL. The IL is already there, so you just have to mess around with it.
Right, yeah. Right. I mean, I just see so many different ways you could use this. I mean, heck, just in development, right? So many times when I'm developing an app, especially when the compile time is long, I'm like, okay, got to compile and run my unit tests and blah, 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 and I make this change. And then, but if I have CodeCop running, if I have it bootstrapped on my app, I could code up a change and see it instantly appear in my app, right? I mean, I could literally test out while I'm developing a feature. I could do that live, have it automatically working. And then once I've tested it out live on my development machine, I could then put it in and compile it in. But I mean, there's like, just, I don't even know what the possibilities are. I mean, you've got so much power here that I'm just wondering like how people are going to use this, because there's like, I mean, there's just so many things you could possibly do with this that you couldn't do before. The ability to just swap out a method at runtime while it's running and change that around is extremely powerful. So.
Yeah, you can do a lot of stuff. I mean, there are already a lot of people in the community doing awesome stuff. There are people, when I started, CodeCop had only a JSON API.
Right, yeah.
So I was like really promoting the unobtrusiveness of method interception. And because I mean, I looked at other solutions and I saw that you had to put a lot of things in your code, a lot of bloat to make the the interception happen. I thought, well, it would be good if there was a library that you had to configure not quite as much stuff as you configure these days on other libraries. Like, for instance, just we put a single line of code and everything just magically happened. And while I was promoting that, the community knocked at my door and said, "Oh man, that is so powerful, but we would like you to code that JSON API for us."
Yeah.
So I was like promoting things like crazy, and the community was saying, "Hey, JSON is very cool, but give us that power via code." Okay, so today CodeCop has two APIs. It has a JSON API where it's really unobtrusive. It does all the stuff that we talked about. You go to a live production environment, and you can, on the JSON, you can put the code you want the interceptors to run. If they are not on your app, you can just drop a DLL there, and you just type on the JSON the name of the interceptor, and it will run. All right. But if you prefer doing the code side of things, if you want to do more of a code approach, and probably you are doing like some guys that are already mixing things with other frameworks. You want to do some mocking, and you want to use it on code, you can use our Fluent API as well. Right. So yeah, we have everything for everybody, you know. And your imagination. I'm sorry, John. Your imagination is the limit. So, concerning your questions, what are the use cases that one can do with this? There are a lot of people doing already, as I said, with the Fluent API.
Right.
There are people mixing, for instance, mocking frameworks like Fake It Easy with CodeCop. They are trying to mix things up. On the other hand, there are a lot of people trying to do some instrumentation also. Normally, you use this kind of technologies to deal with cross-cutting concern logic, like logging, auditing, doing some measuring times, execution times, and security concerns. And basically, that's what your imagination is the limit, you know. So right. If you can execute code that's in a dynamic fashion, and that code can be replicated to a lot of methods. You can, for instance, imagine there are a lot of times that how many times do we check parameters for null? You can just build an interceptor, intercept all the methods, and you never need to check nulls again. So I mean, your imagination is king here. Whatever you want to do that can be automatically replicated to other methods, and is probably something that is repetitive code, you can just use CodeCop for that.
And just to be clear, like, I mean, the other solutions that are out here, I mean, well, there's nothing that does this. There's no competitor. There's no one that does dynamic method interception, the dynamic weaving, as you call it. Yeah. I know of nothing. But even the ones that do it statically, that do the static weaving, you have to put stuff in your code. You have to put an attribute in your code, or you have to put something in there in order to create these, to make it so that it can be intercepted. Whereas with CodeCop, I mean, literally, like if someone wanted to test this out, all they would have to do is go to NuGet, grab the CodeCop DLL, throw one line into their app to bootstrap the thing, and then they can just literally just within a JSON file swap out any method in their app, in anything in the .NET framework, and bam, that's it, right?
Yeah, basically that's about it. And that's the magic of CodeCop and the power. Sometimes it's so powerful that even I'm scared, man.
Oh yeah, well, I mean, you could do. I mean, there's a lot of malicious things you could do with this.
Well, don't give people ideas, man.
Well, I mean, it's important to like be. I mean, people should be aware though now to understand that apps that they thought were secure, that they were secure behind licensing, are not secure, not necessarily anymore, because with CodeCop, you could just swap out a method that says, "Is this licensed?" and you could return true. I mean, anyone could do that to your deal. I mean, it's not like this ability didn't exist before. It's just no one actualized it. I mean, there was a false security, right? Obviously, you have access to pointers in the .NET framework and memory, and anyone can modify memory. And so, I mean, so yes, you know, CodeCop has made this easier, but I think that's a good thing, because that wakes people up that are relying on security. You know, you cannot, if someone has a DLL on their computer, there is no security there. So I think that's kind of a key thing. So it's interesting to expose that, I think.
Yeah, you're right. I mean, if you really are a malicious user and you want to do bad stuff, yeah, that's something. If the DLL security, I mean, the licensing mechanism is not well protected, probably the the malicious guy will discover it and bypass it. Yeah, you can do that with CodeCop, without CodeCop. So there's a lot of ways you can do that. Yeah, but with CodeCop, it's easy.
That's easy now.
Yeah,
you got a skeleton key. Well, but I mean, it can also be used for, like, I was thinking too, how many times do you have this app that you've lost the source code for, right?
Yeah.
And no one has the source code. Well, you could literally change any of the methods in that app. So you could modify an existing 10-year-old application, right? Or whatever it is, and swap out the methods so that you have new methods in there that change the functionality. I mean, obviously you're never going to have the original code, but you can make modifications to this existing app without having to rewrite the thing, which would have been extremely difficult to do before without CodeCop.
Yeah, one of the cool use cases you can do with that is when you have like this library that you don't have the code for it. And for instance, you can intercept all its methods, and then you can draw a flux of what method is called from, I mean, like the dependencies, like method A calls method B, C, and you can probably draw a flux and understand what's going on with that library, because sometimes when we inherit like this legacy code or other code that doesn't belong to us, it's kind of difficult to understand what's going on. And with CodeCop, if you intercept the methods, you can immediately understand what are the dependencies. So that's really a cool use case. We are building a library that we are going to publish very soon that is going to do that.
Oh, awesome. That's great. Yeah, I've got to introduce you to the Glimpse guys as well, because I've in talking with them, I remember when Glimpse was first coming out, and they had, like, because they're tracing the app, right? But they're only able to trace the points that are exposed in the .NET framework in MVC. So they had these specific points that they could gather data from and then send that down. But it sounds like if they used CodeCop with Glimpse, what they could probably do is just trace any point that they want. They wouldn't have to look for the special interfaces where they could actually get in there and proxy things. So I think that would be pretty cool.
They would be they would be independent from the framework. Okay, now they are dependent of what the MVC pipeline and what or other like the entity framework, I think they intercept also
Right.
what exposes to them. But with CodeCop, you don't need nothing to expose, really. You just knock it at the method's door, and I mean, you don't knock, you just grab the sledgehammer and
Right. Exactly.
go right in. So yeah, so basically with CodeCop, you don't need you don't need any sort of API to profile the DLL or the code itself. Yeah.
Okay, so now I obviously I'm not going to ask you to reveal all your secrets here, but I do want to at least dig a little bit into how this works, because this just seems kind of, I think, magical to a lot of people, and it's kind of crazy. How can you do this? Because you're not using any technology like Roslyn or anything like that, right?
No.
To dynamically compile this code. So how the heck are you tricking the .NET framework, replacing objects in memory with essentially not proxies of them, but actual real replacement objects that are modified? I mean, like, from my limited understanding of working with pointers and virtual tables in C++, says that you've got memory in the heap, and if you modify that, you have to like put in a pointer to go somewhere else, because it's all tightly packed in there. So if you make an object bigger, it's going to overwrite something else, right? So are you doing like a redirect, a virtual table that you're pointing to, and then you've got a new object there? Is there some magic,
No,
are you using some magic in .NET that's unexposed, or?
Yeah, that was my first approach. When I started doing my investigations, I started up with messing around with pointers in memory.
Okay.
So in .NET, for the listeners that don't know, you can literally use, there are pointers. If you go you can grab the method table pointer, and then you can basically swap the method table pointers from one object to other objects. And you can literally, if you change the pointers, if you call method, for example, method A out of object A, and you swap the pointer from method A, object A, to method B, object B, when you call it, the .NET runtime will exactly call the method B because you redirected. I don't know why the framework itself exposes that, because that's really a security problem.
You have to put like pound unsafe, right?
Yeah, you have to put unsafe. You have to enable the unsafe on your app. But basically, you can do that. And I started playing with that stuff, but that is really tricky and is very inconsistent.
Okay.
Because of course the CLR team is always changing memory layouts and offsets, and what was the method table layout 2 years before, now it's now another thing. They are always changing, and if you want to build a stable product around it, you can. Right. Because one day they change everything and your product just goes away. But yeah, you can really do something like this by changing pointers in memory, but it's tricky. And when you get to the generics part, you better run.
Oh, yeah.
It's very, very, very difficult to do. So I quit that idea, and when I was almost quitting also this project because I was like, oh, I cannot do this. I was reading around some old stuff about intercepting the JIT. Okay. So I read some of these old posts that are around there, and from some of the guys that wrote the Sys internals, from the Daniel Pistrelli guys that are really known, and I started to understand how I could intercept the JIT, because the CLR exposes an interface that you can capture and do the JIT interception. And what I am doing is that art of intercepting the JIT. And once you intercept the JIT, I mean, you can literally control what your application, what the what the CLR is going to execute. Okay, So whenever there's, if you get a hold of that interface, you have these callbacks to these methods, and when the method is going to be compiled, you already have the raw IL that is going to be compiled, and afterwards you can grab it and inject your IL that you want to modify. So that's basically what I am doing. I'm intercepting the JIT, I grab the raw DLL, and then I mix it up with my IL. Okay,
I see.
but that's very tricky to do. If it was just that, you could really do it easily, but there's a lot of stuff that's really, the CLR is well protected. Okay, it's you can just literally go there and inject code and expect that everything works. When you do things in runtime, like CodeCop is doing, you have to work really, really close to the metal, because, for instance, if you use the reflection emit classes that the framework gives you, it's very easy to write IL. IL is assembly language almost, and it's not as easy to understand. And but the framework gives you the IL writer, then you can use to simplify that process. Okay, so whenever you want to, for instance, write a try catch block with the IL writer, everything behind the scenes will be handled for you by the framework. Okay, like the handler offsets and blah blah blah. So it's easy. And libraries like, for instance, Fody or PostSharp use the IL writer because they are working, they can work with the IL writer because they are doing like this post-build compilation. But when you are working in real life, like CodeCop is doing, you have to work with the raw IL codes, like the hexadecimal codes. It's even difficult to do, and all these concerns about moving things around, like, I mean, if you have a try-catch block that you are going to move it because you added some more code, you have to yourself recalculate the offsets in memory, or everything will just blow away. Okay.
Right.
That's one of the concerns. Other concerns is the metadata. You have to intercept the metadata APIs of the CLR, because you have to literally construct metadata that wasn't on the assembly when the assembly was loaded. Okay, so if you want to imagine, you have basically the CLR works like this. If you have type A, and you want from that type A to call type B, and type B resides on another assembly, what happens is that the metadata for that assembly has to be on the type A for identification. So when type A wants to call method B from another assembly, it has to know the assembly metadata, it has to know the type metadata. Okay, so that must exist in memory, or else CLR won't be able to call that method. So when you are injecting code at runtime, the assembly that add that metadata, basically, I mean, the assembly that was originally loaded didn't have that metadata. What happens is that you have to add it, okay, yourself. So if you want to call, imagine you are intercepting some sort of method, and that method resides on another assembly, you have to push that metadata in memory. So that is very difficult to do as well. So it's not just rewriting the code, it's always these satellite concerns that you have to be aware. So
Right.
this is where the difficulty of this process, and that's why there are a lot of people doing this, because it's very difficult to connect the wires. Okay, I didn't invent the process because everything is there. If you go to, if you're curious enough, just search for how to intercept the JIT. There's a lot of good tutorials, very good explanations. But then it's not just that. You have to read a lot of stuff about the CLR. and you have to understand its intrinsics because because of all of this that I've mentioned, all of these concerns. So connecting the wires together is the most difficult part.
Okay, well, I'll definitely take your word for it.
Yeah, it's a lot of frustrations that you have to deal with. But once you can have something stable, you'll feel very, very, I mean, very happy with the result because,
Yeah,
I mean, you're literally doing something that's not it's anti-nature, right?
right.
You're trying to transform a language that is not dynamic, right? You are injecting code that the original programmer didn't thought about it, right? And you are injecting it. So it's like having to, I mean, it's like having to go through a cement wall, you know, without too many tools.
Yeah, I was just thinking how, I mean, you've essentially made C# and .NET dynamic, like a dynamic language. I mean, it's essentially you've added the dynamic to it, and it almost makes the dynamic keyword seem like a hack because the dynamic keyword is less powerful than what you've done. Like you don't even need the dynamic keyword if you have CodeCop because dynamic keyword is like a bad version of code. It doesn't do close to what CodeCop does, and it handicaps you. Whereas you have basically have the full power. So I don't know. I just think, I mean, there's a lot of applications to this that I don't think we've thought about yet. It'll be really interesting when we see people using this and seeing how they do, you know, all the kinds of interesting and cool stuff that they're able to do with this. So
Yeah, it's a lot of power there that you have on your hands, and I mean, you should use it to create cool stuff. I
yeah,
mean, it's not a remedy for everything, you know, like that hammer and nail
right.
story. But I mean, there's a place for everything, you know. If you need to do something dynamic at runtime and you have to uh, do stuff like where you have to inject several behaviors on a method, and well, so CodeCop is the ideal solution. But if you don't need it really to, because you're just doing simple stuff, I mean, just, well, it's not the remedy for everything. As dynamic is perfect when you want to do
Right.
something simpler. Okay.
Well, yeah. I mean, I would think that everyone should have this in their production app, just simply for the case. I mean, maybe you never use it, but if you have CodeCop running in your production app, like I wouldn't deploy a production app without having CodeCop running on that today, just because of having that ability of maybe I'll never use it. Maybe I'll never intercept methods, or maybe I don't care about aspect oriented programming. Maybe I don't.
Yeah.
But if I'm running my app and I need to like do some kind of logging or check into do some kind of debugging or troubleshooting live on the app, it's a very unintrusive way to do that. And to have that ability, or even to be able to just hot fix, especially, you know, if your app is really like an app that can't be shut down because it costs a lot of money, and, you know, you've got this bug out there that might be critical, you know, if you could just change the method, like, or put in some kind of fix, or even just disable a feature, like temporary, like, you know what I mean? Like to have that instant ability to change something that's running in production, to me, that seems like everyone could use that capability, even if they're not using aspect-oriented programming.
Yeah, that's one of the killer features, I think. It's to do instrumentation and to debug things in production. Well, there's, like you said, there are applications that when they are stopped, I mean, it means losing a lot of bucks. So, I mean, if you can do it live and try to see what's going on, what parameters were passed, because CodeCop enables you to do that. I mean, to see what were the execution times out of the box. CodeCop also enables you to do that. it's very cool. I mean, and if you don't have to go and recompile the code and change everything, even better.
Yeah.
So, and that's one of the main things one of the main reasons why also I dived into CodeCop. It was because at work, my team was instrumenting a large application, and the team, and especially the guy that was working, it was going method by method by method, and just pounding code everywhere.
Yeah.
Oh, poor
That's
guy.
not the way to do it.
Yeah, poor guy. And the guy just like begin method, end method. This was parameters, and he was logging it to another service that's called StatsD.
Oh yeah.
Yeah. By the way, we have already an interceptor that does that, because I remember the guy, and I did an interceptor that automatically integrates with StatsD. So that's one of the reasons that I developed this, because this is a real need. I mean, when you work in a large corporation, you need this stuff. You need auditing. You need you need tracing code. You need to know why does that method take so long. Why? I mean, you have to do this kind of logging for statistics. You need to know. So, and this is the perfect tool to do that, because it's simple, it's quick, and saves you a lot of time and a lot of trouble trying to debug things by hand.
And I think you've lowered the bar of entry for aspect-oriented programming, because, like, for example, that guy at your work, he probably knew of aspect-oriented programming. He probably knew that implementing, I mean, maybe he didn't, but he probably knew that manually copying log, and all these methods was not the best way. But a lot of people, myself included at times, have been intimidated by aspect-oriented programming, because it's like, okay, not to knock PostSharp, but it's not exactly easy to set up, right? You have to like first understand how this works. You got to figure out where you put in like the special parts in your code. Then you got to figure out how to run the post build step and get all this stuff running. It's like, if you want to do aspect-oriented programming, I think before CodeCop, it was a significant investment in time, in understanding, in getting this running. Whereas I feel like now someone can just bam, NuGet package, they've got CodeCop. Like I said, they put one line of code in their app, and then now they can try it out. Now they can say, oh, look, I can learn aspect-oriented programming. I can like swap out methods. I can do this interception and see where this makes sense, as opposed to having this whole big investment up front of all this time and commitment. And do I really want to do a post build step? And then this question of now, this instrumented code, do I want to put it in production, or do I want to just use that template? You don't have to make those decisions. I think that's one of the amazing things is I don't think enough developers are using aspect-oriented programming today, and it's because it's so dang hard to get started.
Yeah, that's one of the main concerns. I mean, I want it to be simple. In my face was just my colleague's face, just almost crying. And I want this to be as simple as I can get. Like I said, the first time I built it, it didn't even need a single line of code, but for security reasons, I put it there. But that's basically like you said. I mean, it's one line of code and a JSON file. Or if you don't like JSON, you can use the Fluent API, and there you can add the code you want. So, but the real value is because it's live.
Right.
Okay?
Exactly.
It's live interception. The app is running, and you can do this interception without tearing the app up down. So this is the real value, okay, of dynamic weaving. And of course, because it's doesn't have when you install CodeCop, like you said, it's just a NuGet package. You don't need to install anything on Visual Studio. It doesn't have any sort of extensions. I personally don't like extensions. The only extension I have is ReSharper.
Right.
But I don't like to install things on Visual Studio, but that's just me. But CodeCop is just that: the NuGet package, JSON file, and the line of code.
Yeah.
That's basically the best way I can describe it.
Awesome. And I guess we should probably wrap this up here. So if someone wants to get CodeCop, they can just go to getcodecop.com, right?
Yeah.
And then I noticed that you have on there a free email course, like a 5-day crash course. So
Yeah, that's of course it's been crazy, man. So many subscribers.
oh, really?
And
Great, great.
yeah, it's been very successful. And the cool thing about it is because there are assignments there where people get rewards and giving vouchers of discount vouchers for licensing. And there are a lot of people just trying to get there first. Like, hey, here's my answer to the exercise. And it's a very quick way to get started with CodeCop, and very easy because it's 5 emails with a lot of information. I mean, you can also read from our wiki that information, but you have to do the research yourself and click here and there. And with the course, it's handled to you on a silver plate. Like just, hey, here is how we should use CodeCop. This is what these are the use cases. And there's this kind of interaction between us and the participants, which is very, very cool.
Awesome. Okay. So yeah, so definitely go to getcodecop.com.
Yeah.
And then also you've got the NuGet package out there, right? So someone can just do NuGet and pull down the library there too.
Yeah, you can on the site now. You can just upload your NuGet packages because we are asking the community to create interceptors, and you can just publish them on our site. What we have on our site is a very interesting tool that will for the people that are using the JSON API, that will automatically generate the JSON for you. Okay.
Right.
Because we already thought about it. We want it to be simple, but look at this, John. I have a video on our YouTube channel that we're going to post the link also, where I intercept 1,000 methods. Okay. And if you had to intercept 1,000 methods and you had to put them on your JSON file, what would you do? You would probably forget everything and forget CodeCop. So with that tool, you can reverse engineer an assembly and very quickly select all the methods, put the interceptors, and it will generate the JSON for you. Okay. Perfect. So if you have a lot of methods to intercept, that tool is priceless. So if you go to our site, getcodecop/tool, you will see what I'm talking about.
Okay. So it's JSON configurable, but really, in reality, you have a tool that configures this for you. So it's even easier than JSON because you can just, in a user interface, click what method you want to override or to intercept, and bam, and then just so happens, and then you can read the file because it's JSON, so you can actually understand what it says, not a bunch of XML in there.
Yeah, it's very simple to use, very light. And that's our main concern, to be the simplest and fastest way that you can to intercept the method.
Well, this is awesome. I think, like I said, I think once this gets in widespread adoption, I think this is something that totally changes .NET, changes the way we write apps. I would like to see CodeCop in the base .NET framework itself, because it's it adds a huge amount of possibility to .NET. Like it makes C# a dynamic language at its root, which is kind of crazy because you get all the benefits of static plus dynamic, and there's really no cost to that, which is just to me that's amazing. Like you need to go become one of the core .NET developers at Microsoft. You probably know more than a lot of them.
No.
Oh, I don't know. You're being modest because you've hacked the entire thing up. So
no. So now, what's important to me is that people are giving me signs that they are liking the library a lot. I mean, we have put this, roughly 1 month out, and we already have, let me check out on NuGet. We already have 3,174 packages downloaded in a month. So this means a lot. There are a lot of people interacting with me on a daily basis, asking me questions, posting issues, and that's a sign of vitality, that the library is live and people are trying trying it out to see how it works. So yeah, that's, to me, that's the most important thing. Knowing that the library is solving real world problems, is killing pains out there.
Right.
Yeah.
All right. Well, thanks. Thanks again, Ricardo. This is, like I said,
You're
really
welcome.
incredible. I'm glad that you made me part of this, and it's been exciting to watch you just launching this thing, and I definitely wish you the best with it, and hopefully some people check it out at getcodecop.com.
Thank you, John.
All right. Take care.
Take care. Bye bye.